Picture this. You open your eyes, and there is nothing. No land. No ships. No sound except the slow, indifferent breathing of the ocean beneath you. The sun is a white furnace above your head. Your lips are cracked so deeply they bleed when you speak. Your bones press against your skin like knuckles against a thin sheet. You can't remember the last time you ate a real meal. You can't remember the last time you heard another human voice. You have been here for over a year. 456 days. Alone. Adrift. In the middle of the largest ocean on Earth. And somehow, you are still alive. This is not fiction. This is not a movie. This is the true story of Salvador Alvarenga. And the question that will follow you through every minute of this story is the same one that haunted every doctor, every journalist, every survival expert who ever examined his case. How? Salvador Alvarenga was not a complicated man. He was born in El Salvador, but the sea had claimed him long before he ever had a chance to settle into ordinary life. By his mid-30s, he was based out of a tiny fishing village called Costa Azul on the Pacific coast of Mexico, working for a local boat owner named Willie, chasing sharks and swordfish in deep water for weeks at a time. He was fearless out there. Maybe a little reckless. The kind of fisherman who pushed further offshore than anyone else because that's where the big fish were, and the big fish were what kept the lights on. He had a daughter back home. A little girl named Fatima. He kept her photograph folded in his wallet like a prayer, salt-worn, creased, the image slowly fading. He didn't see her as often as he should have. He told himself he'd fix that. Later. After this season. After the next trip. There's always a next trip. On November 17, 2012, Salvador loaded his lancha, a small open fiberglass boat, roughly 25 feet long, no cabin, no shelter, with ice, fishing gear, and a week's worth of basic supplies. His crew partner was a 19-year-old named Ezequiel Cordoba. Young. Nervous. One of his first deep water trips. Salvador looked at the sky before they left. The weather reports were mixed. Something was building out there on the horizon. But he had fished these waters 100 times. He told Ezequiel to get in the boat. That decision, that one ordinary morning, that one ordinary choice, would launch the most extraordinary survival story the Pacific Ocean has ever witnessed. The first hours were fine. The water was blue and calm, the lines were set, the engine hummed its familiar note. Then, slowly, the sky began to change color. A bruise spreading from the northwest. Wind building from almost nothing to something that bent the surface of the water into long, nervous lines. Salvador radioed shore. Told Willie the weather was turning. Willie told him to stay. The storm would pass. The fish were out there. So Salvador stayed. By nightfall, the sky had turned completely black. Not the soft dark of a Pacific evening, a violent, compressed darkness that seemed to push down on the water like a hand. Waves climbing from 4 feet to 8 to 12. The little boat climbing each wall of water and dropping hard on the other side, again and again, the hull crashing and shuddering with every impact. Water poured over the bow in solid sheets. Ezequiel bailed with both hands, throwing buckets overboard as fast as the ocean filled them. Salvador fought the wheel. He'd been here before. He knew storms. This would pass. Then the engine died. Not a cough. Not a warning. Just silence where the engine had been. He yanked the pull cord until his shoulder burned raw. Nothing. The fuel line was gone. The motor was flooded and dead. And without the engine, there was no fighting the current. The Pacific Ocean, 60 million square miles of it, began pulling them northwest, away from Mexico, away from the coast, away from everything. Salvador grabbed the radio and screamed their position into it. Willie's voice came back broken and faint. Then the antenna snapped in the wind. And just like that, they were invisible to the world. The morning after the storm was the cruelest moment of the entire ordeal. Because the ocean was beautiful. Completely, absurdly, heartbreakingly beautiful. Flat water. Pink sunrise. The kind of morning that belongs in a travel magazine. Salvador stood at the bow and looked in every direction. Nothing. No ship. No coastline. Not even a bird. He took stock of what they had. Some drinking water in containers. A few crackers. Energy drinks. Fishing lines and hooks. A GPS unit that was useless without a signal and a working engine. 3 days of supplies, maybe 4 if they were careful. He rationed the water immediately. Small sips. Twice a day. No exceptions. Ezekiel asked when someone would come looking for them. Salvador told him soon. A few days, maybe. He was lying. And somewhere in the silence that followed, he suspected Ezekiel knew it. On day 3, the water ran out. What followed was a lesson in the most fundamental cruelty of the open ocean, surrounded by water in every direction, and not a drop you can drink. Salt water would destroy his kidneys and drive him insane before it killed him. Salvador knew this. He had always known this. Now he had to live inside that knowledge. He watched the sky for rain. On day 4, a brief squall passed through. He and Ezekiel ripped off their shirts, spread them across the boat, wrung every drop into containers. They cupped their hands and drank from the air itself. It wasn't enough. It was never quite enough. But it kept them going. For food, Salvador watched the water. Small fish had begun gathering in the shade beneath the hull, a phenomenon of the open ocean, where anything floating becomes a tiny island, and life congregates around it. He fashioned a hook from what he had and sat motionless at the edge of the boat for hours. On the 5th day, he caught his first fish. He ate it raw. He handed half to Ezekiel. Neither of them spoke while they ate. But something was happening to the boy. Ezekiel had not been built for this. He was 19 years old, far from home, on a boat that wasn't moving, in an ocean that had no edges. By the 2nd week, he stopped eating. By the 3rd, he barely responded when Salvador spoke to him. Salvador recognized what was happening. He had seen it before, not at sea, but in men who had simply decided something in a place beyond words. Ezekiel had decided he was going to die. And when a person truly decides that, the body begins to cooperate. Salvador raged at him. He begged. He pressed fish against the boy's lips. He invented stories about rescue ships just over the horizon, one after another, building hope out of nothing because hope was all he had to offer. For weeks, Ezekiel drifted between holding on and letting go. And then one gray morning, somewhere around the end of December, he stopped breathing. Salvador sat with him for a long time. Then he did what he had to do. He gave him back to the sea. And for the first time since the engine died, Salvador Alvarenga was completely and utterly alone. What happens to a human mind when every other human being disappears from the world? The first days after Ezekiel's death, Salvador went silent. He functioned, caught fish, collected rain, kept the boat maintained, but there was nothing behind it. Just motion. Just the body doing what the body knew how to do. Then the hallucinations started. At night, his brain began manufacturing what it was missing. Lights on the horizon that weren't there. Voices calling his name across the water. The silhouette of ships that dissolved when he looked directly at them. Ezekiel, sometimes, standing at the bow of the boat, looking back at him without expression. During the day, Salvador started talking out loud. To himself first. Then to people who weren't there, his mother, his daughter, friends from the fishing village. He held full conversations. He argued. He laughed. He answered in their voices. A psychologist would later explain this was not madness but adaptation. The brain is a social organ, and it will create connection rather than collapse into the void. He talked to God. He bargained with God. He screamed at God. And then, exhausted, he made a quieter peace with whatever was listening. Every morning, he took out the photograph of Fatima, salt damaged now, the image barely visible, and he said the same thing. He said, "I am coming home." Not might. Not hoped. Not if things went right. Was coming home. That certainty, irrational, impossible, defying every probability, was the rope he held when everything else dissolved. And he held it every single day. The months passed the way time passes when there is nothing to mark it. The sun rose. Climbed. Fell. The stars came out, so many stars, this far from any light, that the sky looked solid. And then it started again. Salvador lost count of the days around the third month. He tracked time by the moon instead. New moon to full moon to new moon. He counted them the way a prisoner counts the walls of his cell. His body was changing in ways he could feel but not fully measure. The muscle mass was going. The fat reserves had been gone for months. He was operating on something his body was consuming from the inside, and he could feel the account running lower every week. Getting up from the bottom of the boat each morning required a focused, deliberate effort that left him tired before the day had begun. He expanded his diet to whatever the ocean offered. Sea birds that landed on the boat, drawn by the smell of fish scraps, and which Salvador caught with his bare hands using absolute stillness and then explosive speed. Sea turtles, which he learned to flip and drain for the blood, warm and strange and vital with the fluids his body needed. Jellyfish. Barnacles scraped from the hull. He became, in the most stripped-down evolutionary sense, a predator perfectly adapted to this one specific environment. A human animal with nothing left but patience and intelligence. The sharks were always there. Not constantly attacking, that is not how sharks operate. Circling. Assessing. Bumping the hull with their snouts in the darkness, testing for weakness. Salvador learned to slap the water hard to push them back. Learned that his own blood, from cuts, from the fish he cleaned, drew them faster. Learned to be careful. On certain nights, when a dozen dorsal fins cut slow circles in the moonlight around the boat, he simply sat in the center and did not move and waited for dawn. Around the 6th month, a storm arrived that tested everything he had left. 3 days of walls of water and driving rain and the little lancha climbing and dropping and climbing again. Salvador lashed himself to the boat on the first night, a rope around his waist, tied to a cleat. On the second night, a wave broke completely over the hull and he went under, the rope snapping tight, the ocean pulling at him from every direction. For one long, strange moment he hung suspended between the surface and the deep, neither rising nor sinking, the world reduced to green darkness and the hum of the water around him. Then the rope held. He fought back up. When the storm finally ended, he lay in the bottom of the boat and did nothing but breathe for a very long time. He was still here. 10 months. 11. 12. The weeks had long since stopped feeling like weeks. Time had become something liquid and formless, stretching in the heat of the afternoons, collapsing in the exhaustion of the nights, losing all the shape that human life normally gives it. Salvador's rituals were the only structure that remained. Morning assessment of weather and water. Early fishing in the gentler light. Shade and rest in the brutal midday heat. The photograph of Fatima, every morning without exception. He thought constantly about food. Specific, ordinary, heartbreakingly mundane food. Rice. Beans. Bread warm from an oven. Coffee in a plain cup in a plain kitchen. He would construct elaborate mental menus for hours. It was torment. It was also, somehow, a comfort, because the existence of those foods somewhere in the world meant the world still existed, and he was still connected to it, however thinly, however impossibly far away. He was about 14 months in when the bird landed on the bow. A frigate bird. Black, angular, with the long forked tail that Salvador had recognized since his first years of fishing. He knew frigate birds. He knew that they don't land on open water because their feathers aren't waterproof, which meant they never venture far from land. He stared at it. It stared back at him with the blank, bright eye of a creature that had no idea what it had just done. Then it flew away. Salvador sat up straighter than he had in months. He looked at the horizon with completely different eyes, not the defeated, unfocused gaze of a man waiting for something to end, but the sharp, specific look of a man who has just been given information. He saw more birds over the next 2 days. He noticed a change in the water, slightly cloudier, less transparent, with organic particles that suggested a nearby coastline. The current felt different. Something was close. He fashioned a paddle from the lid of the cooler and began working. Slowly. Painfully. His wasted arms burning after 2 strokes, resting, then 2 more. He paddled through the day and into the night and through the next morning. He talked to Fatima the entire time. He told her he was almost there. On the morning of January 30th, 2014, a shape appeared on the horizon. He stared at it for a long time without moving. He had been here before, or thought he had, with the hallucinated ships and the lights that dissolved. He was afraid to believe it. But it didn't dissolve. It grew. The island was Ebon Atoll, one of the southernmost points of the Marshall Islands, a remote coral archipelago in the central Pacific, nearly 6,000 miles from where Salvador had started. 6,000 miles. Carried by currents across the largest ocean on Earth over the course of 14 months. 2 local residents spotted him coming in. They described it later as something they did not have a clear word for, a battered boat drifting toward shore, and in it, a figure so altered by the sea that they weren't certain at first whether it was alive. Salvador was barely recognizable as the man who had left Costa Azul 14 months before. He had lost more than 50 pounds. His hair was long, matted, and wild. His skin was deeply scarred by sun and salt, his body wasted to tendons and bone. He could barely stand. When they reached him and helped him onto the shore of Ebon Atoll, Salvador Alvarenga looked at the people around him and said one word. Hambra. Hungry. The understatement of the century. The world found out within days, and the reaction fell somewhere between disbelief and reverence. Medical teams documented everything. Severe malnutrition. Chronic dehydration damage. Organ stress. Wasted muscle. Skin damage accumulated across more than a year of unrelenting tropical sun. The doctors who examined him agreed on the medical facts and then struggled to explain the most basic one, that he was sitting in front of them at all. By the numbers, by the physiology, by every documented limit of human endurance, Salvador Alvarenga should not have survived. He was flown to Majuro for treatment and eventually back to Central America. His mother, who had spent 14 months mourning him, who had held a private funeral for him in her heart and tried to rebuild her life around his absence, stood in a room and watched her son walk through a door. He asked for his daughter. Fatima came. She was older now, 14 months older, and she stood in front of this gaunt, sea-carved stranger and recognized him anyway, the way children recognize their parents not by what they look like but by something older and deeper than that. They held each other for a long time. The recovery took years. The nightmares. The hypervigilance. The complicated grief for Ezekiel that no one could fully help him untangle. The strange, broken relationship with the ocean, the place that had tried to kill him and also the only place where he had ever truly felt himself. He told his story to a journalist named Jonathan Franklin, who turned it into a book. He sat before cameras and reporters and told it again and again. And every time, people leaned in the same way. Because the fish and the turtles and the storms and the sharks, all of that is remarkable. All of it deserves exactly the awe it receives. But the real story is something quieter. Every single morning for 456 mornings, Salvador Alvarenga woke up on that boat with every reason in the world to stop. And every single morning, he picked up a creased, fading photograph of a little girl, and he made the same choice. Not survival. Not endurance. Not strength in the physical sense. Just a choice. The same choice, made over and over, in the loneliest place on earth. That is what brought him home. And that is why, out of everything the Pacific Ocean has ever witnessed, this remains the most incredible survival story ever told.